slide there. Awesome. Hi, everyone. We are pinch hitting a little. This is Anu. I'm going to start leading us off while Laura sorts through some of her audio stuff. But welcome. We are here to be able to go over with you some of our best management practices and recommendations for managing agritourism farms in this season with the COVID-19 pandemic. So go ahead, Laura. What we're going to do is just overview and highlight a few of the key things to be thinking about. And we know many of you are already working through this and thinking very much about how are you going to manage your farms during COVID, especially when we're going to have, for many of us, it's a really important time for us to not only bring a lot of sun to the farm, but then highlight the hard work that we've done all summer. And feature all of our locally grown products for sale, as well as involve people in some entertainment and good old-fashioned fun. But the reality is we're going to have this challenge of trying to manage all of these people and to be thinking carefully about how we're going to do that, not only for their safety but for our own and for that of our staff. So what we've done is a team of us working closely with Ag and Markets is to create a set of best management practices that we think sort of focus in on some of the issues you should be mindful of and thinking about your plan for this season. They are best management practices. These are not official. The New York State Department of Ag and Markets has issued a set of FAQs, which came out yesterday, I believe. And so we work closely with them to make sure that these recommendations are in alignment with those FAQs. But what we've tried to do is sort of unpack stuff a little bit to give you more detail, to help you think through the process of planning. The team included myself and Laura McDermott, Betsy Lamb, Betsy Bin from the our Food Safety Alliance, Barb Neal, educator in Tioga County, as well as I feel like I'm forgetting somebody, Julie Suarez with our Associate Dean for Government Relations, as well as Kevin King in Ag and Markets, who definitely was really instrumental and helpful at different points for us in thinking through these guidances and these recommendations. They're really, again, as I said, mentioned to help you consider the ways you want to handle and manage people. And we know for sure that this is going to be a different year than any other year. So a couple of things to start off with. The basics are you have to, if there's anyone on your team or anyone in your staff that might be at risk of getting COVID-19 or be in one of those groups that they may be very sensitive to possibly getting this, it could have repercussions for them as high risk, you would definitely be prudent to consider all alternatives for their participation and thinking about what their roles might be. So why don't we go ahead to the next slide. So these are links to a bunch of important documents that will help you in doing your own plan and thinking through your own plan. The top one is the NISDAM COVID-19 Agritourism FAQs that we just mentioned. These are linked in our document, which is available online. And I'm going to ask Betsy Lamb to drop that link into the chat to the actual agritourism guidance. Or if Laura, if you could just drop the link to that. Oh, there it is. And so within the guidance document at the very end, there's a bunch of these links there for you to look at. So some of the places that, because we have a lot of different activities happening on farm during this time of year with agritourism, we've had to draw from the guidance for farmers markets, guidance for craft beverages, and then some guidance around low risk outdoor arts and entertainment, which is where agritourism falls. That tends to be where we are nested within the overall management of COVID-19 and state guidance. So these are important documents and locations for you to be checking in periodically through the season to make sure that the way that you're handling and managing your farm is still within compliance. So we are, in phase 4 for most parts of the state, but if that changes, that would affect your operations. So please do check back periodically, and also stay in touch with us, because we will update this guidance document regularly. Go ahead. Thanks, Laura. And I think we have Laura and Betsy and Marvin on the call as well. And so any of you, if you want to chime in, please do so as I work through this. So the other documents that we at Cornell have put together for you that are important for you to recognize that are supporting your own New York Forward plan for your business, which I think most of you know you have to have a plan in place for managing in COVID. But we created some U-Pick best management practices. So if you have an apple picking or pumpkin picking, this can be helpful in thinking through how do you design and manage that space on the farm. As I mentioned before, the craft beverage tastings, if you have a license and you're actually doing wine or beer tastings on your farm, there's really clear and specific guidance that's maintained and updated there. And that second link, and then this agritourism one, which we just put out yesterday. So go ahead. So a few of the things to consider is that, because you're going to have plans for managing people, and the bottom line is you'll have to reduce the overall numbers at the farm at any one time. So in the guidance, it does state specifically reducing the amount of people to 33% of what's your full capacity. And we're going to dig into that because that's a really hard thing to figure out. But here are a few alternatives or some creative ways that people in other parts of the country are also thinking through agritourism options and alternatives. One that we thought was interesting was creating a drive through the farm sort of safari where you have educational spaces, but people stay in their cars and they can move around the farm in different places and be able to interact with different exhibits, purchase, do things, but it actually moves people through the farm in a different way. So that's one alternative. Increasing the amount of direct sales that you're offering, so building and expanding your platform for direct sales, and having those available for at farm stands or for direct curbside pickup. Developing your whole online platform. There's a lot of ideas on how to get started. Many of our farmers have had to adapt very quickly this year to moving more virtual and more online. There's other farms that are taking advantage of this sort of virtual environment we're living in by creating different kinds of tours of their farm, so they can enhance the experience of their customers by having a place that they can go and visit different aspects of the farm to sort of beef up or sort of change the way that online experience happens. And the other option is to just not have all of the sort of entertainment type activities you might have had in the past and just focus in on the U-Pick operation and manage that this year. So there's just a few options for you to consider. And again, they're just alternatives. If you feel that with what we're about to share becomes too onerous for you, you can consider. Great. Why don't you go ahead, Laura? So here are some of, this is sort of related to the NISDAM FAQs that were released, but because agritourism farms fall within the low risk outdoor arts and entertainment sort of guidance, here are a few key things to remember: that in outdoor spaces, and this is what we've already been practicing, that any visitors and employees have to maintain a 6-foot distance. And if not, if they can't maintain that 6-foot distance to other individuals, is to be wearing a face covering. This is, and it's really important to remember that this is not anything new, but that face covering, anyone who comes to your farm needs to have a face covering that they're wearing when they cannot manage that distance. But it's up to you and your staff to sort of help ensure that. And then maintaining the visitor presence at 33% of the maximum capacity. So we'll talk a little bit more about how we can figure that out, because most farms don't necessarily have a maximum capacity. But what we're really trying to give you is a way to think through this and have it be a reasonable and manageable situation for the farm. And just as a reminder, most of our farms have been open through this whole pandemic, but if you are reopening or opening, you have to have a plan in place. And there's links and to a whole series of worksheets for you to use to help build that plan. So you have to have a New York Forward plan. Thanks, Laura. Laura, do you have audio now? Doesn't look like it. So moving on, one of the key pieces of this effort is going to be having a really robust communication plan, and you're going to have to start early and do it often and keep it updated, because reminding people before they arrive of the practices that you have to uphold around physical distancing and using face masks, that people should not come to the farm if they have symptoms, or if they've traveled, because in New York we have travel advisories, and I think there was 35 states on that list the last time I looked. But you need to know that, and so you want to make sure that you include that in your screening of customers before they come to the farm. You want to encourage them and place a lot of hand washing stations around the farm. You might have to increase the number of those, but also make sure that they're aware of that they're going to be more of those opportunities on the farm, particularly around any food service areas, and on anything where people might be touching surfaces a lot. So for example, a hay wagon, if you're going to do hay rides, you need to have hand sanitizer available on the ride, and then be sanitizing the wagon between rides. And one of the pieces that's tricky with this season is, traffic flow. People tend to aggregate or congregate around different activities, and our recommendations are for you to try to think through how you might move people apart and regulate the numbers of people that might be in any particular activity at any one time. And so something like a wagon ride, if you have a queue or a line that's formed, you have to have a line that's designated and have perhaps some marks on there with 6-foot distancing so people know how to line up and wait. So that'll take a little bit of planning and looking at your own farm layout to know how to manage that. And so letting customers know in advance that there's going to be some limitations on the number of people that can come to the farm at any one time, and how you're going to be managing some of those attractions that might have some limits to the number of people who can be standing there and watching. But being able to communicate that frequently and clearly and in time if possible, if you give real-time notifications so that people don't make a trip out to the farm when you're already full. So other things to emphasize are that family groups have to stay together, no pets, and eating produce and partially discarding partially eaten food is not allowed. Thank you for adding that, Laura. And so tasting is, if you are offering tastings of food, you have to follow the restaurant guidance. And we can talk about that a little bit more. There's been a couple of questions around tastings of food. We have information about tasting of beverages in the document. A lot of it is similar except for the utensils and the materials used. And again, having to manage distancing and sanitation. So ask your customers these questions, and we have them outlined in the document for you to use. Is just basically requiring a verbal confirmation to make sure that they understand that, they're in this with you, that we're in this together, and it's going to take everyone doing their part to keep this as a positive experience for all. Way you can support that is by putting up some signs, so posting at your farm gate, but also putting up signs around the farm to emphasize physical distancing and using sanitizers, and signs for where to line up for things so that people can actually behave the way that you need them to. So anything you can do to help that will be great.
Hi, Anna, it's Laura.
Laura's
and I apologize to everyone. I just had a webinar earlier tonight. and then we'll see what happens. So I can take over if you'd like.
Go
And
ahead, Laura. Yeah,
okay,
that'd be
thank you
great.
so much for pitch hitting. I appreciate it. So, folks, my apologies for that snafu, but thanks for hanging in with us. So just to kind of drill down on a couple of the things that you probably are already very aware of, but we wanted to give some hints about making sure that you understand and your customers understand how important physical distancing is, both in the field, in the store, and at any attractions that you might have on the farm. And there are different ways that you can guide people to stay physically distant in a field. You could stay every other tree or every other row, or just try to help them understand the importance of that. Making sure that family groups stay together will also improve the chances for folks not getting surprised when they come around the corner and greeting children that are running around. But try as best you can to keep that a policy. It is not, it's not illegal or barred. You can use wagons to move people, but the challenge with that, and something to think about that, is that the more you have to load people on and off wagons to move them to fields, the more problems you're going to have with physical distancing and for that sanitation step. So our best management protocol really tries to minimize moving people as much as possible. And then on the other hand, trying to make sure that you have plenty of bathrooms and hand washing stations or sanitation stations at the very least available for the public as they go on your farm. And so here's the next step, and this one is very is how to estimate the COVID-19 capacity of your farm. And we came up with a number of different methods for doing this. And these are described in even more detail in the fact sheet that accompanies this. But there's a couple of simple ones to estimate the total number of individuals and divide your total outdoor area, the outdoor area that the customers would be allowed to access by 100 square feet. That would allow plenty of physical distancing, and you can do that quick and easy calculation. Or you can estimate by the total number of groups, dividing the total outdoor area that customers could access by 250 square feet, and that estimates that the average group of people is about 4. That would allow for the appropriate physical distancing. An even easier method is that once your parking area is a third full, well, you're at capacity. That's 33%, so that might be the easiest for a lot of people. And then method 4 is to just assess your own space and allow for customers to maintain a distance of 6 feet while they're there. And this can be done for a combination of indoor and outdoor spaces, as long as you can kind of spread those folks out. So maybe method 4 is the easiest way for you, but there's a couple of different options for trying to figure that out. And you'll know very quickly, if not already, what activities or where on the farm you're going to end up with a little bit of a bottleneck and trying to kind of sort that out. And I can't see if there's any questions.
There's just a little bit difficulty sometimes hearing you, Laura. I don't know if it's the way you're moving your, right now you sound perfectly clear. So just
all right, I'll try to really keep my phone quiet. And part of this managing capacity is just managing your customers, right? So some of the things that the numbers of customers, you can manage them by perhaps creating an online appointment or booking system. And this is being done, I know a number of farms in the southern Hudson Valley are doing this with great success. You can consider a higher all-inclusive rate for a certain amount of time. That would be an option. Those booking systems, I do want to say that there's a number of those platforms that are listed on the fact sheet that people can look at to try to set that up. If you cannot do any pre-booking or don't want to do that, and you don't want to do an all-inclusive rate as part of that, you can post your farm capacity messages on your website, on social media, Facebook and Instagram, and also have outgoing phone messages that say, you know, come before 11 because we're booked after 11, or just post the busiest hours and expected wait times for some of those days that you know are going to be busy. But that real-time notification to manage your customers' expectations is going to be very helpful to you. We also realize that per New York Forward guidance, there are no bus tours of unrelated individuals allowed in New York State right now. So that will also probably help with kind of controlling some of the customer numbers. Training employees that are dedicated to monitoring when traffic is coming in and out of the farm, so kind of understanding capacity will help. And then when the farm reaches that capacity, helping to instruct customers to return at a different time will, again, help people not be disappointed. But it's all going to be about communication. This is a fairly big change from what we've done in the past, so this is going to be a real key point.
I would like to just chime in there, Laura, and add one thing, is that for some of our wineries and breweries that have gone to an appointment only or to more of a restricted attendance, they've been surprised to not see the downturn in sales, but they've actually seen an uptick because they're able to provide more attention to individuals when they're there. So just keep in mind that because there's less, it doesn't necessarily always equate with less sales.
Right. I think that's a great point, Anu. Thanks. Well, just again, thinking about where you're going to have bottlenecks of people, where people will congregate, and a lot of that congregation hopefully is going to be right at the cashier when they're purchasing things. And a couple of tips, making sure that only one family member actually checks out while others exit, that might help. Making sure, again, that your employees maintain that 6-foot distance while interacting with customers, and of course always have a face cloth or face covering. Consider using plastic shields or dividers between employees and customers. Some farms have been able to do this quite easily, and that makes everybody feel a little bit safer. And helping employees with a sanitary protocol that might actually involve someone packing merchandise while someone checks them out and does the actual transaction. Making sure that there's a process for washing and sanitizing hands, scales, etc. between transactions will help people feel safer. And again, these are best management practices. They are not specifically mentioned in the guidance, although we really, really firmly believe that this will help your customers feel safe and your employees feel safe and be safe. And then, of course, different exit and entrance will help keep people away from each other as much as possible, and providing hand sanitizer at the exit. And here's a picture in the lower left. These are little stuffed animals that look like really cute, cuddly baby animals. And it's very obvious that people would want to pick them up and cuddle them and play. And here's a great teaching opportunity to just make sure that people know that they don't really aren't able to handle and touch things repeatedly, even store merchandise. And that goes for things like peaches and other product that you don't want them to handle repeatedly. So just that kind of signage, that kind of communication is helpful. And then rethinking outdoor entertainment. This is another area that's going to be quite different from regular farm stand operation or U-Pick. You want to rethink your design to limit that congregating. Again, one-way traffic around the farm will be helpful. Food sales are allowed, and if you want to have tables for people to eat their food on, that's totally okay, as long as you space the tables appropriately and follow guidelines for outdoor food service, and these are New York State guidance. There's links to these as well. But basically, again, ensuring that 6-foot margin is, or that radius is not impinged upon, so the tables will have to be a little bit further apart. A one-way entrance and exit is going to be helpful. And picnic tables must not exceed 10 people at an individual picnic table, even if they're a whole group of people that are from the same party. Children's play areas are not allowed, and the only way you can get approval to have a play area open to the public on your agritourism farm is with approval from your local control room or the regional control room. And there's a link to that. You can petition to have that approved. In some areas of the state, this will not be a problem at all. In other areas, I don't believe that you will be allowed to open that play area, but you want to make sure to do that in advance of having your customers visit it and be disappointed if you actually are able to. And if you can't, you're going to have to communicate that thoroughly in advance. Physical distancing at demonstrations and activities like hay rides, corn mazes, haunted houses, all of these things are allowed, but you're going to have to do the physical distancing, think about the whole process, and make sure to sanitize appropriately. Petting zoos need to be converted to an animal viewing attraction where there's no possible way that you can touch the animals. So that's usually done. I've seen it done mostly with another layer of fencing that just gives a little bit of a barrier around that petting zoo and just not allowing people in to interact with the animals. The one thing that we had a little tricky time trying to figure out, incidental music is allowed, but no ticketed music. So basically, incidental music is something that you've not advertised, you might have playing in the background. It's not something that's going to attract a crowd to listen to. So it shouldn't be the mainline feature, the main attraction at your agritourism farm. And then food or beverage tastings are allowed. You have to follow the New York State guidance for this, and there's some best management practices for craft beverage. This is just a diagram on one of those BMPs that kind of illustrates how you could possibly do some kind of tasting if you decide you want to do that. And I see there's all kinds of questions, and I hope that you guys are busy answering them. Again, I'll go quickly through this because I think most of you understand these things. Making sure to protect the employees, and if your family members are employees, them as well. Communicating the changes in the policies that may have happened as you move into the fall agritourism season. Making sure to provide employees with the appropriate PPE and train them and how to use, clean, and store them. And remember that employees that interact with customers must wear a face covering. You may actually add on some daily health checks, whether they're temperature checks or whether they're just an attestation of your employees feeling well and not having come in contact with folks. Those kinds of things need to be done daily if you're going to implement them. And then proper hand washing, sanitation, clean clothes, and physical distancing with other employees as much as possible. And then the clean environment is really important, increasing access to toilets, hand washing facilities for both customers and employees, developing and following your protocol for cleaning and sanitizing. And this is in the fact sheet, the best management practice fact sheet. This is all very clearly described with links to different sanitation materials. And porta potties, hand washing stations, credit card machines, all of those things that are touched regularly, including some of your merchandise perhaps, those things should be sanitized and part of the protocol for cleaning. So that's basically it. I really apologize for the technical difficulties. These proactive steps, though, are going to protect your team and your customers, and it's going to allow agritourism as a very low risk, fun, and safe experience during this pandemic. So people are going to be really excited to have that access. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and then we can hopefully have an opportunity here to talk with one another. I don't, if anybody's been monitoring that chat box, maybe they want to bring up a question that came up periodically.
I can share. There was a couple of questions. There was a question around the hay rides or wagon rides. Those are allowable, but the important thing is that anyone on the ride must be wearing a face covering during the ride, and you should be able to observe 6 feet between groups on the ride. So your capacity will have to be reduced, and then you'll need to sanitize any handles or surfaces between rides. So it requires a sanitation plan for that to happen. An alternative to offering that would be to do a walking path through the farm. If you could offer something like that, if it was just a sort of a farm tour or a driving tour, but those are just other ways to consider managing that reduced number of people that can be on a wagon at a time. There's there's a question about, is there any way to have non-incidental music events that are advertised? I think that you could probably just say, say in the background that there will be music accompanying in the background, but you cannot sell tickets. The critical thing is you cannot sell tickets for a music event. It can't be a draw, and it can't be the focus of an entertainment activity.
Amy had a question about the picture on the fact that the new picture on regulations, and we are actually talking about that, Amy. This is to address the agritourism things that he announced 2 days ago, and they are also included in the FAQs, and that FAQ talks about everything we discussed here today. But both those FAQs and the best management practices go into slightly more detail, and so I would really strongly encourage you guys to download them and make sure that you have read them from front to back, just in case there's anything that would fit your farm that we didn't specifically mention.
I did just post the link for the FAQs in the chat box.
Okay, great. Thank you, Betsy.
And Betsy, can you post the guidance, our best management practices link again, because it's way up on the top again.
And again, Jerry is wondering about the rules around a haunted hayride. It really is about reducing the numbers. You have to maintain that 6-foot distancing, so you're going to have to reduce the overall numbers inside the activity. So that's where those guidance or kind of those methods of trying to figure out what your maximum capacity is and then reducing it by 33%. That's where that comes in, but you can run them. You just really have to have people masked. If you don't think the people I would encourage all of the customers to wear a mask in the promos, because you can't guarantee that you're not going to turn around and bump into another customer.
Laura,
so Laura, you're breaking up a little, so I was just
okay. Maybe I'll just be quiet.
With the maze, you have to think. You can think about. So we have some suggestions on estimating capacity in a maze in the document. So you can think about the total area. Say you had a maze that was 200 by 200 feet, so 40,000 square feet. But the reality is, people are only walking in the aisles, and you've cut aisles into that maze. And so let's say that was 20% of the total area is your aisle. So then you have to figure out in that space, how could you manage distance? And then the other reality is people are going 2 directions in those aisles, because if you're like me, you hit every dead end there is, and you have to backtrack. So we suggest that you look at the amount of space you have in aisles and divide that by 250, because you're assuming that people are going into this as a group, or a group of 4, a family, or a set of friends. To figure out your maximum capacity. And that example I just gave you would be 32 groups. That's what we calculated, just as an example, where you were figuring on 20% of the actual area being aisles that people are walking in. So let's see if some, it's true that we have some folks that are posting music on Facebook that's accompanying internal, but they're not selling tickets, they're not featuring it as a draw specifically. There has been some problems with that, particularly in the Hudson Valley. Laura, I'm not sure if you're familiar with those. I wasn't familiar with those until I heard about it from you, and I think Julie. But some individuals have had some challenges and lost their licenses for not observing the guidance. So just a caution to you about that. Marvin, are you on? Would you like to share something about that?
Sure. I've know several musicians here in Ithaca, and they've all told me that their gigs have been canceled because they've been advertised on Facebook or promoted as an event. And the state is really, holding the line on that, even though a lot of us feel like, well, we could probably pull that off safely. They're saying no because they're afraid it will draw people in from further away, and that's what they want to avoid. So many of those nurseries and wineries and so forth are being told to not do that anymore. That if it happens to be music on a Saturday afternoon, that's fine, but you can't promote it as something that will draw people from a distance.
And that's actually something that came up as well in our conversations with Ag and Markets, is to discourage our, agritourism hosts from drawing people from a far distance. In this time, it may be more prudent to be focusing on your sort of return customers and your sort of local base than trying to pull in people. If you draw from other states, this is a time when that could be something you may want to dial back a bit.
And possibly having something where you have only open by appointment, where people have set times for their appointments and they're allowed to stay for a certain period of time. But again, you have to get that information out. And when you're an established operation that people have been going to for years, the likelihood is they might just come rather than looking all that up on your Facebook page. So it is, anything you're doing with advertising should really push the idea of either checking the Facebook page to know when you're full or using some kind of a booking system.
There was another question about food and walking around with food. And again, that's technically you're not supposed to be eating food at a place like that unless you're sitting down at a table. And you're also not really allowed to eat an apple in the orchard and throw away the core. That's what they're saying, that food should be eaten at the table or bought and paid for and taken home.
If you have a picnic area, you'll definitely want to manage it and possibly have somebody there staffing the area so that people are seated when they're eating, because then they can take off their masks comfortably, but also to sanitize tables between customer groups. It's we've got one of the questions was, is there anything new or different about UPIC now versus earlier in the season? I don't believe there is anything different. Our recommendations then are still holding up today.
Somebody in the chat though said that new rules came out from the governor 2 days ago, and I don't
think
know
those were the agritourism FAQs.
Okay, probably.
Mm-hmm. That includes some UPIC stuff. Any other questions?
I think Amy raised a good question about what do you do if somebody says, but I drove for 2 hours to get to your farm and now you're telling me that it's full. Do you have any suggestions, Anu, about what to tell them, or could they reserve a spot for them to come back in an hour or so?
Sometimes I think that's so tricky. And I think it would be a lot depending on how close you are to capacity and how people are moving. But if people are making those trips and they've been return customers, I think it's the communication in advance that's really important. But that will be hard. You have to use your best judgment. In the end, these folks, are going to come to your operation and you want to host them in a way that's safe for everyone. So it's really your best judgment, but just keep in mind that the distancing, especially around activities, is where you'll be challenged, where people congregate.
So we're getting some questions about the food and just, throwing away apple cores, but also picnicking. And there are specific recommendations for that in the guidelines that we put out. But if you think about the idea of not having partially eaten food around, and also sort of containing the idea of where you're eating, is, I think, what we're looking for.
If you have tailgating happening in your parking lot and you're using that as your metric of being at capacity, 1/3 full, you can space people out with where they park. So then tailgating would be fairly easy to manage. Any other questions? I see Laura's answering some questions. And do we need a monitoring individual in each and every block? I think it's worth having somebody there staffing to make, and especially in combination with the verbal acknowledgement of the sort of new rules for behavior and expectations at the entry of, as people come onto the farm. But then to be able to emphasize and monitor that when they're in the U-pick or walking around the farm, or if folks are gathering at an activity. I think Laura, you had shared the story that how having that sort of affirmation up front made it really easy to sort of talk to customers when they were maybe not complying with the desired behaviors. I think the question about bringing water bottles into the corn maze is an interesting one. That would be something that someone would be carrying and moving about with, but we should probably double check on that. I don't think that would be an issue. It's not like food that is open and then you may be dropping or walking around carrying it. You're not, I tend to think of it as an activity when you're walking with food that you're sort of keeping your mask off for a longer period of time, whereas taking a drink, maybe not. But I think the important thing there is to be emphasizing that people wear their face masks. And then encouraging people to use our restroom before they go into these so they're not exiting and entering repeatedly. This has been something we've tried to encourage even with the U-pick guidance.
There was a question about U-pick guidance or a comment from Jamila, so I put that link in there too.
Great, thank you.
And we do have in the guidelines, there are some different resources for the booking. I don't know if maybe anyone else in the group has, or in the audience has used some of them and might recommend what they've found useful.
So Kim is asking for confirmation on that bring your own food thing. And I think that is allowed as long as you go to the designated picnic area and have your meal there without being, 6 feet from other people.
Yeah, that might require, and so it says to maintain 6 feet between the tables, but if you did that, it'd be hard for people to walk in between them. So we're encouraging you to spread them out further than that. If you have picnic tables or ways in which you mark an area, if people are, sitting and picnicking, just make sure that you have a way of designating that space. In some cases, that might mean simply drawing a grid on the ground and you like spraying something on the ground so that people know that they can sit in one area or the other. But if it's tables, just spread those out and manage the flow of people in and out of the area. Any other questions?
I think there was one earlier on that was answered in the chat, but maybe we can just bring it up so that it'll be on the recording. But somebody was asking about whether or not these guidelines will apply to U-pick Christmas trees later on.
Betsy, did you want to answer that?
Yeah, so it depends on whether or not you have activities. And I was bouncing back and forth with Stephanie, the concept of, what's an activity? So some of what the regulations for Christmas tree growers who are not doing anything that qualifies as agritourism are really in the U-pick guidelines. And I just put those in the chat box also. But if you've got activities, then that puts you in agritourism. But so if the only way for people to get to the tree cutting area is by a hay wagon or some other kind of transport, what does that mean? So you still need to follow the rules for putting anybody else on a wagon and taking them somewhere that are in these agritourism guidelines. So and all of these that we've been putting out, there's some complexity in terms of which ones do you use, and sometimes you use several sets. And that's also true with the New York Forward guidelines, where you need to read and affirm the different sets of guidelines to say that you've actually read them. When you're creating your safety plan, you may need to read several. So it's not a very good answer, but you need to sort of think about what it is that you're doing on your farm and whether or not you're better served by the UPIC guidelines or the agritourism guidelines, or you kind of need both.
And again, we'll be posting links to this webinar in multiple locations and send those out through all of our outreach channels as well. So if you want to loop back to this, if you have questions, you can reach out to any of us with your questions as you're trying to think through how to plan your farm, or if things come up during the farm, or even we would love some photographs. You know, it's just really great to see how people are managing. It helps all of us learn. So if you think of it and snap a photo, drop it in the email to us about how you're managing parts of your farm to be safe during this time. And also, if you have ideas or things that are really working for you and how you've handled people in a particular activity, go ahead and share that as well, because we can add examples like that to our web document to make it more alive and real for all of us.
There's a question about whether or not there are funds available to help farmers pay for added expenses. I have not heard of any. Does anyone else?
I have not.
As Anu said, I think in some cases you'll find that people appreciate what you're doing, and that will make them feel safe, and they will come out. So you're always balancing between you know, the people that are worried about going someplace and the people who are not worrying about going someplace. Some of these rules will help you sort of reassure your customers that they can come out to an event like you're putting on.
And for some of you who might not have had people on your farm this summer, or say spring, to pick strawberries or whatever, you're just now thinking about opening up for events and agritourism and all. The business that you pick people have experienced this spring has been phenomenal. It's been like record setting all over the East Coast. So I would expect quite a few customers to come out and not think that this is going to inhibit people, but rather it's going to, people are encouraged to come out. They want to do things outside. They can't go to movies, you know, they can't go to concerts. This is something they can do, and they'll be coming out with their families. So be prepared. I think you're going to have a good season.
I agree about the Facebook group. It's a good idea, because I think you'll find the best ideas come from the people who are doing it. And so it's beyond my skill set also, maybe not Anu's, but if somebody wants to get something put together, I'm happy to publicize it out to the listservs that I have also. Has anyone on the call tried anything or put anything in practice already? I think you could unmute yourself if you have. Also, if you go and look at some of the other operations, either in your area or around, you might find on their websites a lot of what they're doing. I know I've been talking to Matthew Kritz for the Christmas tree growers that are online, and his website has a lot of information. I've looked at some of the other websites for Christmas tree operations that have agritourism. And you can get some great ideas just looking at their websites also.
I do want to say, I don't know if I can hear me, but this is Laura, and I have talked to a number of people who've used those online booking system platforms, and I know that probably sounds like a very big lift at this point in the season, but they are extremely happy with them and have kind of answered a question that they've been struggling with, just the managing crowd capacity, the farm capacity, the crowd control thing. And it's resulted in much happier customers, much more workable space for employees, and their sales have not been diminished. Well, if folks, we'd be happy to, okay, Anu, that's great.
We lost you again, Laura.
You can't hear me? So Anu put some information about the Facebook account for Cornell Small Farms, so that's wonderful.
Yeah, feel free to share photographs and some stories of your efforts. You can certainly use our social media channels, and we can get that information out to other places as well. It'd be wonderful to see how you're all adapting, and then keep in touch. Just drop a line and let us know again, what's working and what's not, so we can help think through solutions with you.
And thanks, Laura, for putting this together, even though it was kind of hard to.
Even though it was almost a disaster.
No, we persevere.
Yeah, thanks for your patience. And that's how it happens, but that's how it goes sometimes. So good luck, everyone.
Yeah, good luck, everybody.
Stay safe.
And feel free to let us know if you have questions. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.